The alien woman had been screaming for 72 hours straight, and when Dr. Cross entered her cell, he understood immediately why she was not screaming from her own pain, but from drowning in everyone else's. Elijah pushed open the heavy metal door of cell 301 with a trembling hand, his heart pounding against his rib cage as the cacophony inside nearly deafened him. The rhythmic echo of Veyla's tormented screams seemed to reverberate through every inch of the small room, her figure hunched on the cold floor in silent agony. "Dr. Cross," a guard said nervously from outside the door, his voice barely audible over the alien's cries. "We've tried everything." Elijah held up a hand, cutting off the man's words without turning around. He had come to solve this problem. He wasn't here for explanations or excuses. His mind raced as he approached Veyla slowly, careful not to startle her. She was small and fragile compared to him, but there was no mistaking the strength in her voice. It was a sound that seemed to tear through his very soul, agonizing, relentless, and utterly without end. Her skin pulsed with an eerie red glow, reflecting the intensity of emotions she absorbed from those around her. Elijah squatted down beside Veyla's trembling form, trying not to flinch at each harsh inhalation of pain. The scent of sterile antiseptic filled his nostrils as he opened a small digital case and removed a series of diagnostic tool sensors designed for alien physiology. He needed to understand what was happening within her body. "Veyla," he said softly, trying not to raise his voice above the scream's relentless hum. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes snapped open, locking onto him with an intensity that made Elijah take a step back involuntarily. They were large and dark, like the darkest depths of space, its offendless voids, filled only by her own internal struggle. But it was when he touched Veyla's shoulder gently, his hand barely brushing against her cold skin, that something astonishing happened. She stopped screaming immediately. Her body stilled, as if all energy had drained out of her in a single instant. The room fell silent for the first time since Elijah arrived, and even through the thin walls he could hear guards letting out relieved breaths. Veyla's eyes focused on him with an expression that was almost grateful. He couldn't be sure. She looked like a ghost now, drained of all color except pale blue. Her chest rose and fell softly, each breath more controlled than before. Her screams seemed to have vanished from within her completely. Elijah continued his approach cautiously, placing one hand on the side of Veyla's face, feeling the heat emanating through her skin in waves. "You're okay now," he murmured, trying to soothe her with every ounce of kindness he possessed. He wanted desperately for this moment of peace to last. "Is she gone?" a voice asked from behind him, breaking his concentration. It was one of the researchers, looking pale and shaken in Elijah's peripherals. Elijah nodded slowly, not moving his hand away yet despite the urge. "For now," he said quietly. "I believe I understand what is happening to her. Please tell me how we can fix this." The researcher stepped closer, worry etched into every line of their face. "I need some time with Veyla alone," Elijah replied firmly but gently. "Let's get you all out of here for now and give us both a chance." The guard nodded hastily and ushered the others away without another word, leaving Elijah to turn back towards Veyla again once he was sure they were gone. "Tell me what hurts," he said softly as she looked up at him expectantly. "It's okay if you can't talk. Just let me know how I can help." Veyla blinked slowly and then seemed to reach out tentatively, her hand touching his arm lightly before drawing back quickly. It was the first sign of trust Elijah had seen from her since stepping into this God-forsaken room. "Who are all these others?" she asked weakly, her voice barely above a whisper, but still filled with exhaustion and confusion. "Why do they hurt?" He squeezed his eyes shut for just an instant before taking a deep breath and starting to explain carefully. "Slowly, you're in a facility where many people aren't kind or gentle towards you. They feel fear, anger, everything bad, and it gets mixed up inside your mind." Her large dark eyes widened further at this revelation as she struggled with understanding the implications of his words. "Roman too can't tell when something is real," Veyla confessed softly, her voice breaking slightly under the weight of admitting such vulnerability. "All these emotions feel so much worse than my own pain." Elijah nodded gently, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead as an instinctive gesture of comfort, a human custom he hoped would offer some small amount of solace in this terrifying situation. "We will figure something out together," Elijah promised with every ounce of conviction at his disposal. "We'll find a way to keep the bad feelings away." Veyla's expression softened slightly, and for just an instant her eyes lost their haunted look as she seemed to lean into him unconsciously, seeking comfort from someone who actually cared. But then reality reasserted itself harshly. More guards had returned with new orders or supplies. The sound of the door opening shattered Elijah's momentary hope. Veyla's body tensed immediately at the intrusion, her eyes narrowing again in fear and pain as fresh waves of negative emotions flooded back into her soul. Elijah steeled himself, knowing what he needed to do next if they had any chance of helping this fragile alien being. He would find a way through this storm of suffering no matter how long it took, and give Veyla some semblance of peace in the midst of such overwhelming chaos. As Elijah began his work once again, amidst renewed screams, knowing full well that he alone held her only hope for respite from endless torment, something within him resolved whatever challenges lay ahead, he would stand beside this empathic being until there was no more pain. "Doctor." Elijah Cross stood in front of Veyla's cell, his heart heavy and mind clear as he prepared to approach her for what could only be described as a precarious mission. He had been briefed extensively on the situation, but found that understanding did little compared to witnessing first and the agony she was undergoing. The walls around them were lined with monitors displaying vital signs readings, and security cameras casting harsh, unforgiving light upon Veyla's cell. Elijah knew from experience that empathy could be both a gift and a curse for beings like Veyla of the Resonance. It meant experiencing not just their own emotions, but those around them as well. In this facility teeming with hostility and fear, her screams were as much an expression of internal turmoil as they were physical distress. Behind him, he could sense the guards shuffling restlessly, anxious to keep things moving despite knowing that little was accomplished in Veyla's presence, save for increasing their own stress levels. Researchers whispered amongst themselves, exchanging worried glances over charts and reports, each one seemingly more bewildered than the last by this alien woman who seemed to be suffering a torment beyond measure. But Elijah approached differently. He cleared his mind, a skill honed through years of meditation practice, and focused on radiating calmness and compassion. His hands moved with careful precision, not towards any tools or restraints, but rather as if he were gently patting the air around him in an effort to soothe it before entering Veyla's space. "Please give us a moment," Elijah said calmly to the guards still lingering nearby. "I need time alone." There was hesitation at first. Some members of staff looked apprehensive, others outright skeptical about what he might achieve that previous attempts had failed to do. But Dr. Cross carried himself with quiet confidence born from decades spent understanding pain, both physical and emotional, and it seemed his presence itself spoke volumes. The guards exchanged uneasy glances before finally nodding their reluctant agreement. They shuffled away, leaving Elijah alone in the room save for Veyla's anguished cries filling every corner. He walked over to her cell, stopping just outside its threshold where the faint hum of a containment field buzzed quietly around him like an ethereal guardian. He could see Veyla's form trembling violently within, skin shifting through dark hues that spoke volumes about the emotions she was feeling, every shade reflecting some aspect of despair or fear. "Veyla," Elijah called out softly, but distinctly so as not to startle her further. "I'm here now." Her screams momentarily faltered, a small pause before continuing with renewed force, a desperate plea for release from an endless nightmare. But she had looked up at him. That tiny fragment of acknowledgement was enough. Elijah took another deep breath and stepped closer until he could place one knee down beside the metal bars dividing them. His hand reached out gently without touching, fingers hovering just barely above, as though to reassure her visually more than physically. "I'm here because I want to help," Elijah promised softly, his voice a gentle murmur, but carried with absolute sincerity. Her eyes large and dark, reflecting everything around her like mirrors of the soul, fixed on him again, confusion mingling with something else he couldn't quite identify, yet hope was trust building slowly beneath all that pain. "Who are you?" she asked weakly after several breaths had passed in silence. "I'm Dr. Elijah Cross," he replied simply but warmly. His gaze never wavered from her, instead drawing down towards the cage where she sat curled protectively around herself, as if to shield against all external horrors. "I understand what's happening here better than most others do." His tone was soft, measured, calculated not just to offer answers, but also comfort in this strange and terrifying place for both of them. Yet it seemed to resonate deeply within Veyla. The tremors lessened slightly at his words, as though she found solace merely from hearing someone who appeared willing to listen. "Why her?" she asked again, voice barely above a whisper now, but still thick with sorrow and bewilderment under all that suffering. "What is this?" Elijah nodded gently before pressing forward into explanation carefully crafted around simple truths meant to provide some clarity. "Amidst such chaos, you're here in a facility where many people aren't kind or gentle towards you. They feel fear, anger, project all these negative emotions, and it gets mixed up inside your mind." Veyla's eyes widened further then. They seemed larger now than ever before as comprehension slowly seeped through layers of agony and confusion. Her voice cracked slightly under the weight of such vulnerability, as she confessed, "Roman 2 can't tell when something is real. All these emotions feel so much worse than my own pain." It was a raw admission, on that tugged at Elijah's heart, even more given how little it took to draw forth this fragile truth from someone who had been pushed beyond endurance. Yet he only nodded again, pressing the softest kiss possible against her forehead, an instinctive gesture born of human custom meant primarily as an offering of comfort. "We will figure something out together," Elijah promised with every ounce of conviction at his disposal. "We'll find a way to keep those bad feelings away." Veyla's expression softened slightly then, and for just that brief moment her eyes lost their haunted look as she seemed to lean unconsciously into him, seeking some semblance of peace in someone who genuinely cared. But reality pressed itself harshly back upon them both. Ever-present noise of the facility shifting behind Elijah reminded sharply how little sanctuary truly existed here. More guards were arriving with new orders or supplies. Their arrival shattered that precious moment where hope seemed more than just a distant glimmering star against an endless night sky filled solely with torment. Veyla's body tensed immediately at this intrusion, eyes narrowing defensively. Again, as fresh waves of negative emotions flooded back into her soul, Elijah steeled himself then, knowing all too well what he needed to do next. If there was any chance whatsoever of helping this empathic being find respite from endless suffering, he would stand beside Veyla now until the last possible moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, refused to abandon his promise of finding peace within chaos. He began moving forward once more towards her cage, already planning strategies and measures designed solely around offering protection against those external horrors flooding inside her mind unchecked. His resolve hardened further. Whatever it took, he would make sure Veyla felt safe from all the negativity swirling like poison in this forsaken facility. But as Elijah continued his work amidst renewed screams now echoing off sterile walls once more, something within him solidified into unshakable determination. No matter how long or difficult the journey ahead proved to be, he would stand beside Veyla until there was truly nothing left but peace. Elijah stood by Veyla's cage, her screams echoing through the sterile halls of the government facility like a constant drumbeat of suffering. The guards had been instructed to leave him alone for a while longer, their presence only exacerbating the emotions that were overwhelming Veyla. Elijah could feel it in every fiber of his being. She was drowning. "Please," he said softly, addressing the new wave of arrivals with an authoritative tone despite his gentle demeanor. "Can you give us some space? Your fear and anger are hurting her." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but ultimately nodded, hesitantly withdrawing from Veyla's holding cell under Elijah's firm yet compassionate gaze. Once alone, Elijah approached slowly, projecting only the most genuine intention of kindness. He stopped a few feet away from where she was curled in a ball on the floor, her body convulsing with every scream that tore through her vocal cords. The air seemed charged with negative energy, but he pushed forward anyway. There had to be something he could do. "I am not going to hurt you," Elijah said softly, his voice barely above a whisper as it carried across the cold metal of the room. "I want to help." Veyla's eyes met his brief momentary flicker of recognition amidst her turmoil. Her large, expressive orbs reflected an array of emotions: fear, confusion, and now a hint of desperate hope. Elijah extended one hand toward Veyla, moving it slowly as if making sure not to startle her further. "May I?" She hesitated for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only seconds. The room seemed to hold its breath with them both, Elijah's heart pounding in his chest, and Veyla's screams dying down into a series of sharp gasps. "Please," Elijah whispered again, softer this time, almost begging. Veyla's hand emerged from behind her body, reaching out tentatively toward his. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against the tips of Elijah's own extended fingers. He felt it instantly, a sudden rush of calm washing over him like a gentle wave in contrast to the storm surrounding them both. The moment their skin made contact, Veyla fell completely silent. She stared at Elijah with wide eyes, her body slackening from its previous tension. Her shifting colored skin began to settle into soft blues and greens colors associated with peace and tranquility rather than fear or anger. "You," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "You feel kind." Elijah's heart swelled at the sound of her voice, so fragile yet clear in its revelation. He felt an overwhelming urge to wrap his arms around Veyla, but he resisted, for knowing that while physical comfort was what she needed most desperately, it wasn't enough given their circumstances. "I am kind," Elijah replied softly, offering a gentle smile as sincere and heartfelt as possible under the current conditions. "And I promise you, we're going to figure out how to make this better." Veyla's eyes remained locked onto his for several moments longer before she seemed to finally relax, further still her breathing evening out into something resembling peace, for perhaps the first time since her capture. "Thank you," Veyla said quietly. After a moment, "I didn't know it could feel like this." Elijah nodded gently, understanding every word without needing them spoken aloud. Her suffering had been relentless. His touch had offered her an escape from that reality, if only for a brief period. It was enough to give him renewed resolve. "We will find more ways," Elijah said determinedly. "We'll figure out how to shield you better." She looked at him with genuine hope now, eyes no longer filled solely with torment, but also beginning to reflect trust and something akin to faith in his ability or willingness to help her through this nightmare she found herself trapped within. Elijah moved forward again cautiously, ensuring he didn't push too hard. "I'm going to work on creating a safer space for you," he promised. "Somewhere where these emotions won't be as overwhelming." Veyla nodded slowly in agreement, but remained silent, letting his words and the sincerity behind them wash over her. She continued watching him, almost searching for any sign that this brief moment of respite might not fade away completely. "Would you like to tell me your name?" Elijah asked gently after a pause. "Maybe it will help us connect better." Her eyes widened slightly at his question, a mix of surprise and gratitude flickering across her face. She hadn't expected him to ask such a simple thing, as if she were just another person he could speak with rather than an alien specimen. "My name is Veyla," she whispered after taking another deep breath, the first time Elijah had heard her voice without it being torn by agony or fear. Elijah felt his heart swell once more. "Veyla," he repeated softly, almost tasting the sound of it on his tongue. It was a beautiful name, elegant and flowing like water over stone, and he meant every syllable when he said it aloud, as if offering her back to herself in some small way. "Thank you for telling me," Elijah continued gently. "It helps us understand each other better." She nodded once more, clearly appreciating the gesture, but also still wary, understandably so after everything she had endured here and likely before arriving at this facility too. Elijah moved closer again cautiously until they were standing side by side in front of her cage. Could see now that there was a sense of calm between them despite their surroundings, which remained as hostile looking as ever. "Let's work on making the space better," he suggested quietly, wanting to take practical steps forward while still maintaining this fragile connection between them. Veyla nodded again, a quiet affirmation that she understood and trusted him enough to follow through with whatever plan Elijah had now put into motion. "Together," she murmured softly, almost as if speaking more to herself than anyone else present. "We can do it together." Elijah smiled warmly at her, feeling a surge of determination washing over him once again, this time not just for Veyla's sake, but also driven by the knowledge that there was someone who could truly connect with him amidst this chaos. "We will," he promised softly. "Together we'll make sure you have peace." And as they stood together facing forward into a future filled still largely with unknowns and challenges, Elijah knew one thing clearly: whatever it took, no matter how long or difficult the road ahead would prove to be, he was going to stay beside Veyla until there truly existed nothing left but peace within chaos. Elijah had managed to establish a semblance of calm between him and Veyla, but he knew this wasn't enough. The oppressive atmosphere of fear and malice in the facility continued to seep into her very being, causing waves of despair that threatened to overwhelm them both once more. He had promised her safety and peace, a promise he was determined to keep, even if it meant pushing back against those who would only bring further harm. With a deep breath, Elijah moved closer to Veyla's cell and extended his hand through the bars. She watched him warily at first, but then slowly reached out as well, wrapping her fingers around his own. The moment their skin touched, she visibly relaxed, her body unfurling from its protective ball like delicate petals blooming. "Elijah," Veyla whispered softly, breaking the silence that had settled between them for a brief respite before everything else resumed flooding back in again. Her voice was tinged with hope and fear, hope that he might truly be able to help her escape this nightmare, and fear of trusting someone after so much betrayal. He returned his gentle smile, squeezing her hand reassuringly without breaking eye contact. "Veyla," Elijah replied just as softly, "I'm here for you now." She blinked back tears, but managed a small nod, the first sign that she might be starting to trust him in some measure despite everything around them. He knew they needed more than this fleeting moment of relief. Veyla required an understanding of what was happening to her on both emotional and physical levels, if there truly were going to be any chance for change. "We need to talk," Elijah said, his voice still quiet but filled with resolve now. "I think it's important that I know exactly how this place is affecting you." He turned slightly towards the cell door behind him, making sure he was still within reach of Veyla, while also indicating their need for privacy from eavesdropping guards or cameras. Veyla seemed to understand his intention and nodded carefully. "I will explain," she agreed after a moment's hesitation, her voice steady, even as her body trembled ever so slightly under the constant barrage assaulting them both. Elijah stepped back just far enough that he could speak clearly without having their conversation overheard, but still remained close enough to maintain his connection with Veyla. The space between them felt charged with an unusual sort of energized, gentle hum of empathy and compassion cutting through the cold metal bars separating them from her tormentors. "Please tell me about your abilities," Elijah began softly yet firmly, looking directly into her large eyes now brimming with a mixture of emotions. "I want to understand how everything you're experiencing is affecting you." Veyla took another deep breath and closed her eyes briefly before opening them again to meet his gaze fully once more. She seemed to find some measure of strength in the trust she was starting to place in him. "I am Veyla of the Resonance," she started, almost reciting something from memory rather than speaking freely, yet still managing a tone filled with sorrow and resilience underpinning it all nonetheless. "My species, Harmony, are empathic beings. We feel everyone around us." Her voice paused for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. Elijah could see the weight of this burden pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush what little peace they had managed so far between them. "Every emotion you experience," Veyla continued hesitantly, after a breath, "I feel too." Her gaze flickered around him momentarily before returning back to his face with an intensity that spoke volumes about the depths of suffering she carried inside. "Fear, hatred, anger, every cruel thought directed at me or anyone else near this place." Elijah's heart clenched painfully as he listened, feeling a surge of compassion coupled tightly with righteous fury for those responsible for inflicting such torment upon her. "And," Veyla went on after another pause filled with struggle and resolve alike, "every guard who fears their job, every scientist coldly curious about the alien specimen, I feel it all." The weight of what she was bearing became increasingly clear to Elijah, his hands curling into fists at his sides as he fought against the urge to lash out to demand justice for her in that moment. "Veyla," Elijah said gently but firmly, "they have been psychologically torturing you without knowing it." His voice held a mix of horror and determination, no horror over what she had endured, and determination not to let this continue any longer than absolutely necessary, if he could help it at all costs. She nodded slowly in acknowledgment, her eyes reflecting the deep well of anguish hidden beneath them. "It is so," Veyla agreed with a quiet resignation that broke Elijah's heart further still. The injustice cut through him even sharper now, knowing full well how she must feel alone amidst this storm of negative emotions, without any reprieve from those who should have been there to protect her instead. Elijah stepped closer again, ensuring his hand remained firmly clasped around hers despite the barriers between them. "I am here for you," he said resolutely, allowing no doubt in either their minds about what that meant going forward. For just a moment longer than seemed possible given everything else, the connection held strong and steady against whatever hostility might surround them any further outwards, beyond this small bubble of understanding they had managed to create together so far. But Elijah knew it couldn't last forever, not in an environment like this one filled with those who would seek every reason still to tear down the fragile bond he was trying desperately now to build up. "Director Vance," a sudden voice called from somewhere behind him, interrupting their precious moment and sending Veyla's eyes darting towards the door anxiously once more. "What are you doing in here?" Elijah turned around slowly, but kept his hand linked with hers through the bars as he faced the newcomer, a stern-faced man whose dark suit seemed to absorb all light like a void itself. "Director Vance," Elijah greeted professionally, yet without any hint of warmth, given how much disruption her arrival brought suddenly into this fragile sanctuary they had managed so far. "I was explaining Veyla's situation." The director glared sharply at the alien woman, who now remained silent once more under their gaze, suddenly looking back with a wary glance between Elijah and Vance herself. "Explanations done," Vance snapped impatiently, clearly annoyed that this particular prisoner had ceased her agonizing screams, which meant less motivation for future experiments, according to some twisted logic of theirs, apparently without concern over whether anyone else might suffer thereby too from such cruelty inflicted merely out of base motivations alone towards furthering science at whatever cost. "Yes," Elijah answered firmly yet respectfully, trying not to let his anger show through despite everything he had just learned about what Veyla endured here already. "She needs a different kind of treatment now." Vance rolled her eyes dismissively before turning back around and heading out of the room briskly, leaving behind only residual tension still crackling in the air between them. But Elijah remained undeterred by such obstacles, instead focusing intently on Veyla herself once more to reassure her that whatever else might happen beyond these walls now did not mean their connection would falter here within where she needed it most. "Let's work together," he urged softly but firmly, squeezing her hand reassuringly again, even as they both knew full well how much still remained unsettled between them and what lay ahead despite any progress made so far. "Together we can find a way." Veyla nodded slowly in agreement, this time without needing the added physical connection to maintain their fragile bond, her eyes reflecting back at him now with newfound hope amidst lingering pain too. "We will," she whispered again, almost as much for herself perhaps than anyone else here still around her, yet also clearly meant directly toward Elijah himself. "Together we'll make sure there truly exists nothing left but peace within this chaos." Elijah smiled warmly once more despite everything they had endured thus far and every obstacle that remained ahead of them, now moving forward together into whatever future might await beyond these confines, filled with hostility and fear still lingering in its very air. "We will," he echoed back just as softly, squeezing her hand one last time through the bars before gently releasing it. Together we'll make sure you have peace. And despite all odds continuing to stack against them here within this facility's walls, Elijah found himself more determined than ever now to stay by Veyla's side until there truly existed nothing left but calm amidst such overwhelming chaos. Wherever else might still lie ahead along their path forward together. Chapter 5. The Escape. Elijah watched silently as Director Vance stormed out of the room, her footsteps echoing through the sterile halls like an angry drumbeat. The tension that had been building ever since Veyla's arrival continued to simmer in the air, hanging heavy between them and the alien woman herself, who now sat trembling, trying desperately not to revert back into a screaming mess. Vance demands I leave, Elijah said quietly, but with firm resolve as he turned back toward Veyla. She wants us to resume what they call research on you. He saw her shoulders tense at his words, the fragile calm that had settled over them breaking under the weight of new fear and uncertainty. She has been exposing you not just to pain, Elijah continued, unable to keep a slight edge from creeping into his voice, but also to emotions. Negative ones to test how far she can push your empathic abilities without physically harming you. Veyla's eyes widened in shock, reflecting the horror of what he was describing even as her skin flickered with darker hues. Elijah could see it clearly now. Shifting colors were not just a reflection of her own feelings, but also an echo of everything around them. Why? She whispered, voice barely audible over the oppressive silence that had settled between them once more. To understand you better, Elijah said grimly. But I refuse to stand by and let this continue. Veyla's large eyes locked onto his face, searching for some kind of reassurance despite everything he was telling her. He could feel the weight of what came next pressing down on both their shoulders, decisions that would determine not just where they went from here, but also who survived to tell the tale. Together, Elijah said firmly, reaching through the bars and taking Veyla's hand once more with a gentle squeeze. We can find another way. She nodded slowly, her eyes flickering briefly in relief before returning his grip tightly. With every moment their hands were connected, she could focus. Agony could breathe easier, without the constant onslaught of negative emotions that plagued her otherwise. Let me get us out of here, Elijah whispered to her then, moving deliberately but carefully toward a nearby file cabinet filled with documents and plans for the facility's layout. I know these corridors better than they do. Veyla watched him go, feeling both scared and oddly comforted by his steady presence, even as everything around them felt like it was closing in. Where will we go? She asked quietly once he had returned with a set of blueprints spread out between them. To safety, Elijah replied simply. There's an old ventilation shaft near the main power grid. It should be accessible now that everyone is busy elsewhere. He studied the plans intently, his fingers tracing along certain paths on paper marked by XS, and notes in various handwritings denoting areas of particular interest for those who oversaw her confinement. We'll need to move quickly, Elijah said finally. The guards will notice soon enough if we're missing. Veyla nodded once more, rising to follow him closely as he led the way through a series of dimly lit corridors and sealed doorways marked with warning signs about biohazardous materials and restricted access. Their progress was slow but steady thanks largely to Veyla's ability to sense approaching threats. Each time they neared another guard or potential complication, she would pause momentarily, her eyes narrowing in concentration as her skin took on a more alarming palette of dark reds and blacks reflecting the hostility around them. Through here, Elijah murmured when finally arriving at an air vent partially concealed behind maintenance equipment near one wall. "It's our best shot." Veyla paused then, looking back toward where they had come from as if sensing something just beyond their reach, but still close enough to bring her down again into pain and terror once more. "We have no choice," Elijah said gently yet firmly, guiding her closer with a reassuring hand on the small of her back. "Let's go." Together they pushed aside the metal grate covering the vent, peering cautiously inside at narrow shadows leading deeper underground towards an unknown destination, but one that offered hope over the oppressive reality of what lay behind them. "Ready?" Elijah asked softly when she hesitated by the entrance, his grip on her hand tightening ever so slightly to offer support without forcing movement from someone who had endured far more than any should have already in their lifetimes. Veyla nodded again then, taking a deep breath that seemed as much an act of courage as anything else before stepping forward into darkness with Elijah close behind. Each step they took felt like another victory against the odds stacked against them within these walls, another inch gained toward freedom where there once had only been despair and pain. But even now, Elijah could see how fragile everything remained despite their progress. Thus far their escape route was risky at best, fraught with traps, both physical and emotional alike, that would surely test not just her strength, but also his own resolve to protect someone who did more than simply exist beside him. "We're almost there," he said again when she began trembling slightly under the strain of moving through such tight spaces designed only for machinery rather than living beings. Veyla's eyes flashed with a mix of determination and fear as they continued onward toward their goal, his voice anchoring her each time she faltered, reminding her that despite everything around them seeking to break both mind and spirit alike, there still existed something worth fighting for here within this endless nightmare. And so they pressed on together through darkness filled with shadows, but also light enough now, thanks in no small part due solely his unwavering belief in whatever lay ahead beyond these walls of torment. Once freed from their grasp, finally, at last, they reached the main power grid, where Elijah knew several access points existed to gain freedom, though each required careful navigation amidst potential dangers lurking within. "Stay here," he instructed when reaching a junction with multiple vents leading off towards different ends of the facility. "I'll scout ahead and find us our way out." Veyla nodded, her grip tightening briefly around his hand one last time before letting go reluctantly as Elijah squeezed back reassuringly, then disappeared into shadowed pathways leading further from their starting point. Every second he moved alone brought its own risks, see it. Each moment closer to freedom offered solace against the fear of what remained trapped behind him still within this facility's walls. Elijah made quick work through maze-like passages until reaching another vent opening high above ground level, where a small crawl space led outwards toward relative safety beyond. Heading back, he whispered when satisfied with his findings, crawling backward carefully along narrow paths now towards Veyla once more, who awaited patiently just as before under dimly lit surroundings, but also filled somehow still with hope born from their shared determination to break free together no matter cost involved thus far, indeed already paid so dearly by both alike. "Found us a way," Elijah said when reaching her again. "Let's do this." Veyla nodded solemnly, rising quickly and following him once more into darkness toward promised freedom where once had only existed despair amidst endless walls filled with hostility, awaiting anyone foolish enough to remain captive within them. Still long ago, indeed now left finally far behind at last. Together they moved swiftly yet cautiously through winding paths, leading upwards, until reaching final vent opening, above ground level, from which Elijah helped her exit first, guiding gently into cool fresh air of outside world beyond, where once had loomed only prison walls, filled with endless malice, awaiting anyone foolish enough to remain entrapped within them, still long ago, indeed now left finally far behind at last. "We made it," he said softly, when both stood safely together amidst freedom they fought so hard merely moments earlier to attain, against all odds stacking heavily then, but ultimately breaking through nonetheless under strength of their combined wills, working tirelessly towards common goal despite everything, seeking relentlessly instead only to crush such hopes outright, once more now forever defeated, indeed never more to stand again in their wake, no matter cost incurred, thus far already paid by both alike. Veyla nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting back at him not just relief, but also gratitude, somehow still amidst lingering pain too, from journey endured together through darkness towards light, where once had only existed endless torment, awaiting anyone foolish enough left behind instead long ago, indeed now finally free forevermore, nevermore to be trapped again in such nightmare, no matter cost incurred, thus far already paid by both alike. "Together," she whispered then, looking up at him with renewed hope amidst lingering fear still too. "We'll find a way." Elijah smiled warmly. Despite everything they had endured, so fair each obstacle overcome only because of their unwavering bond forged under dire circumstances, yet somehow remaining unbroken even now as they stood together outside world beyond, finally free forevermore, nevermore to be trapped again in such nightmare, no matter cost incurred, thus far already paid by both alike. "We will," he echoed back just as softly, squeezing her hand one last time through bars of past confines still lingering ever briefly before letting go. "Together we'll make sure you have peace." And despite all odds continuing yet to stack against them, moving forward now even beyond walls finally left behind, at last Elijah found himself more determined than ever, indeed never more willing again simply stand idly by, instead, as anything else might threaten once more freedom attained, thus far already paid so dearly, but ultimately secure for both alike, no matter path leading further ahead still remained yet to be charted. They moved forward together now towards unknown future, filled with hope amidst lingering pain too, from journey endured so far, indeed free forevermore, nevermore to return again into such nightmare any longer, no matter cost incurred, thus far already paid by both alike, but ultimately secure now at last under strength of their combined wills, working tirelessly always toward common goal, no matter what lay ahead next still remained yet to be faced together indeed. And Elijah led Veyla deep into a secluded forest, far away from any human settlements or facilities. It was late afternoon when they finally arrived at his cabin, an old wooden structure nestled between tall pines and overlooking a serene lake. Despite its modest appearance, the house felt warm and inviting as Elijah guided her inside. The first thing he noticed about Veyla's reaction to their new surroundings was an immediate stilling of her once constant turmoil. She paused in the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder at the tranquil beauty surrounding them. Her skin slowly began shifting from its dark tones back towards a lighter shade of lavender and green, colors that signified calmness and relief. Elijah approached Veyla gently, his hands reaching out to touch hers. "We're safe now," he whispered reassuringly. She looked up at him with large eyes filled with gratitude and quiet hope. He noticed her skin softening even further as she absorbed the serene emotions emanating from him, and only him in this moment of peace. Veyla leaned against Elijah, letting out a long sigh that seemed to drain some of the weight off her shoulders. "You saved me," she murmured softly, almost reverently. "You were the only one who did not hurt just by being near me." Elijah held Veyla tenderly, feeling overwhelmed with emotion himself as he realized how much pain and suffering she had endured because of others' cruelty and fear. It was a heavy burden to carry when all she wanted was peace. "Then stay," Elijah said gently, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him from learning about her ordeal. "Feel only this." Veyla's skin glowed softly with hues that reflected not just calmness, but also something else. Something new and unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. It was as if she were absorbing more than just emotions now. There seemed to be a deeper connection forming between them. "Well, make sure you have peace here," Elijah continued, his heart filled with resolve despite the uncertain path ahead of him. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Veyla nodded slowly, her eyes locking onto his as she processed what he was offering. The gentle warmth in his voice and the sincerity in his gaze provided a stark contrast to everything else around them for weeks now. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing closer against him, finding solace in his presence like never before. I feel it." Cabin soon became their sanctuary, a place where Veyla could finally breathe without drowning in the emotional currents of others' negativity. Every day brought new insights into her abilities and how they intertwined with Elijah's constant kindness and understanding. One night, under the soft glow of candlelight inside the cozy living room, Veyla turned to Elijah while feeling his emotions intensify as she watched him prepare for bed. "You've been so kind," she began hesitantly, unsure if her thoughts were even coherent enough after everything they had endured together. Elijah paused in his movements, looking over at her with a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I couldn't do anything else," he replied honestly, setting down his book and moving to sit beside her on the couch. "You've been through so much." Veyla's skin responded immediately, turning an even more peaceful shade as she absorbed Elijah's gentle concern for her well-being. She felt a warmth spreading within her that hadn't existed before, something profound yet elusive. "Is this what humans call love?" Veyla asked softly, after a moment of quiet reflection, pressing closer against him so their bodies were touching gently in the dim light. "You make me feel different." Elijah's heart skipped a beat at her question, and his hand instinctively reached out to touch her cheek tenderly as he kissed her forehead lightly, feeling his own emotions swirling with affectionate warmth. "This is exactly what we call love," he murmured back, squeezing her hand softly. "This bond between you, it's more than just kindness." Veyla's skin turned a pure gold color in that moment, a shade so radiant and beautiful it seemed almost unnatural under the dim light of their cabin. She looked up at Elijah with eyes reflecting his emotions, directly nosing through him, feeling every nuance of what he was thinking even before he could articulate them aloud. She leaned into him completely then, absorbing not just his calmness, but also his strength and resilience after everything they had faced together. Her own heart felt full to bursting point as she realized the depth of their connection, beyond anything either of them ever imagined possible between two beings so different yet so irrevocably linked now. The end came quietly in that moment, encapsulated by a simple kiss on her forehead, and the soft glow emanating from her skin, symbol of perfect peace found amidst chaos finally overcome.